marked the 50th anniversary of Dr. Raymond Moody publishing Life After Life, which was the #1 best-selling international sensation that introduced the world to near-death experiences, which we call NDEs for short. Contrary to naturalistic, materialistic expectations, Moody, armed with a PhD in philosophy, later a doctor of medicine in psychiatry, found that the 150 people that he surveyed and personally interviewed reporting hyper-realistic visionary experiences during a time when their brains should have been incapable of consciousness or laying down memories. Surveys in Australia, Germany, and the United States found at least 4% reporting near-death experiences. Thus, we should have no trouble finding them among our fellow faculty, church folks, students, trusted friends, and relatives. I was shocked to find so many within my circles of trust professing their impactful experiences once I gave them permission by sharing that this is my area of research. All of a sudden, people around me start opening up, and they'll call me out in the hall, even in secular academia, and say, let me tell you, let me tell you about this experience I had. Now, Moody was not scientifically rigorous, not bothering to corroborate claims with physician interviews or hospital records. But with 150 ostensibly sane and intelligent subjects, his book could not be dismissed as a qualitative study of a handful of people. Something significant was happening to large numbers of people. He introduced us to a widespread, impactful experience that apparently could not be predicted by sex, age, expectations, location, or prior beliefs. A few months after Moody published his book, Dr. Michael Sabone, a physician who would soon teach cardiology at Emory University, was shown Moody's book by a colleague. The kindest response he could formulate was, "I don't believe it," or as he often says in interviews, "I thought it was all hogwash." He said, "It was not scientific enough. The testimonies did not jive with what he knew of the brain's quick demise and clinical death. It should shut down. And besides, his cardiac patients never spoke of such experiences." He was challenged, however, to ask his own patients. The third patient he interviewed approached him and stunned him by reporting a near-death experience. Confident that they were hallucinating, Sabone conducted from 1976 to 1981 the first scientific study of cardiac patients with near-death experiences. He hoped to explain Moody's findings with natural processes of dying brains. He interviewed two groups. First, those who experienced cardiac arrest and reported a near-death experience, then another control group of cardiac patients who reported no such experience. He asked both groups to tell him what happened or what they imagined to have happened during the resuscitations. The NDEers who claimed to have observed the resuscitations from above always got the details right, often down to astounding details. The surprising accuracy of this, quote, apparent non-physical veridical perception, end quote, could not be explained scientifically. The non-NDEers were always wrong with significant details. A year into his study, he concluded that his patients had indeed left their bodies and eventually wrote the book Recollections of Death, detailing his study and how he corroborated testimonies with physician reports and hospital records. This study ultimately deepened his own faith in the reality of a spiritual realm and motivated him to more active Christian involvement and leadership in Bible-believing churches. He published a second book on his second study, finding Christian NDEers gravitating toward traditional churches, prayer, Bible reading, rather than New Age outcomes. To move scholarly study forward, Dr. Sabone, along with psychologist Ken Raines, sociologist John Audette, and psychiatrist Bruce Grayson, formed the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS, which soon launched a peer-reviewed journal dedicated to NDE studies. So by 2005, a good bit of research had been done. I don't have that updated for you, but by that time, over 900 articles on NDEs were published in scholarly literature. Prior to 2005, gracing the pages of Psychiatry, The Lancet, Critical Care Quarterly. These are top medical journals and other journals. Journal of Near-Death Studies. American Journal of Psychiatry, Resuscitation, Neurology. In the 30-year period after Moody published Life After Life, that was 1975 when he published it, in that 30-year period, 55 researchers or teams published at least 65 studies of over 3,500 near-death experiences. So meta-analyses and publications summarizing the results of past research can quickly bring newcomers up to date in the field, confirming that, so far, naturalistic hypotheses have been found inconsistent with the data. NDEs cannot be easily dismissed as hallucinations, vivid dreams, the results of DMT-like substances released by the brain during trauma, hypoxia, etc. Experiences report them as real, and the research to date seems to confirm this reality, to me at least. I think it's very strong. Naturalists, of course, do not take these studies and conclusions sitting down, and so you have people like Susan Blackmore, who wrote an early book, Dying to Live, trying to explain near-death experiences naturalistically. Later, Michael Shermer talks about them, and others have written critiques as well from a naturalistic standpoint. From my analysis of the data, some reports can be explained away by naturalistic factors, such as hallucinogenic drugs or mental illness or writing a book for fame and fortune. And that's why you have to worry about the people publishing paperback books about their experiences. They're all over the place. They have other factors trying to appeal to different niches. So I wrote this book to try to summarize the actual studies of near-death experiences rather than looking at the paperback books and things that you see on the internet about near-death experiences. Yes, you might want to take a picture of that. By the way, all of my books should be available today and tomorrow on Amazon free of charge if you get a Kindle. Or you can email me and I'll send you a free PDF. Me and Gary Habermas and J.P. Moore, we're getting a little bit older, and we'd like for some other people to start taking on this research. From my analysis of the data, some reports can be explained away by naturalistic factors, but a dozen lines of evidence taken as a cumulative case, which I build in this book, convinced me that many people are actually experiencing the other side. Well, what is this? Well, it's not the new heavens and new earth of Revelation, which in my eschatology are way future, but it's something on the other side, maybe a vestibule to paradise or the interim period, but it's somewhere on the other side. That's my conclusion. Why engage now? Research has matured to such a state that seasoned academics have devoted entire careers to these studies, documenting and summarizing research. Moody resisted drawing spiritual conclusions, preferring to remain the Socratic questioner. So he would come to the end of his book and he'd say, my goodness, there's an afterlife. And he said, well, these are, after all, just testimonies. And he just didn't want to come to a conclusion till later in life. Later, after a lifetime of study, he concluded the afterlife hypothesis makes the best sense of near-death experiences. Long-term researchers such as Sabon, Dr. Ring, Grayson, Moody, and Van Lommel, and Long are partially or fully retired, but they're still among us, live among us if you want to talk to them or consult them on what is now a lifetime of research they put into this. And they no longer feel the academic peer pressure to remain elusive about their spiritual conclusions. I teach in secular academia, and we're so careful not to offend the secularists. And so, things are presented in very vague terms, but now a lot of them are more open about their conclusions. NDE discussions have not been relegated to academic silos. People are fascinated with them outside of areas of specialty. Many of my students at a public university say they were greatly impacted by the little book, Heaven is for Real. It was made into a film, and it was, I had a relative who asked me to read this book, and I reluctantly read it. I've been into apologetics all my life. I'm just a natural questioner, and I read it and thought, well, it's a little boy's testimony. You just got to trust the family. I don't know the family. But within it was a blurb by Dr. Long, who said, I've studied thousands of these experiences, and this is consistent with my study. And I thought, somebody's been studying these things? I've got to get into this research. But some of my students at a secular university will say, oh, I saw that film. That really impacted me. And so it's out there. Best-selling books representing various world views have flooded the market. 2023, this was at movie theaters, after death, and I just talked to a pastor who's used that in his church and advertising his community. Come watch this film. It's out there. People are thinking about it. And then you'll have on shows like MacGyver or NCIS, people will be having near-death experiences. People are thinking about it. They're fascinated. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist, and his lawyer wife Jody run a website where well over 5,000 people have anonymously contributed their NDEs and other visionary experiences. People cannot seem to get enough of NDEs. My spring Kennesaw State University class on death, dying, and afterlife, addressing NDEs and deathbed experiences, always fills up. I have also spoken to nursing classes about near-death and deathbed experiences, and expected people of various worldviews eagerly vie for support of their worldviews with NDE evidence, with some being more consistent with the extant evidence than others. With such a strong grounding in research and such a wide popular appeal, one would assume, given the large overlap of relevant issues with philosophers, right? God, the afterlife, ethics, theology, philosophy, you'd expect that a horde of Christian academics representing various fields would be at the forefront of such investigations and would eagerly investigate past findings to integrate or repudiate research relevant to their fields. Yet, in March of this year, I searched Atlas serials containing over 390 full-text major religion and theological journals and found no results for near-death experiences. Now, I'm sure there were some in there that were just not found, but that just shows there's this dearth of response from the Christian and religious community on near-death and deathbed experiences. I also searched deathbed experiences, deathbed visions. Zero. Why the deafening silence on the part of Christian academic theologians, philosophers, and apologists? Well, let me suggest some possibilities. Number one, scholarship is so diverse that we tend to operate in silos. So if nobody else in our field of study comments on a subject, we assume it is irrelevant to our field. So until about 12 years ago, I studied apologetics extensively at Columbia International University, Trinity, Southwestern Seminary. I'd never seen anything on near-death experiences, so I assumed that it just wasn't a Christian thing, or these were just hallucinations. Number two, we believe the responses of popular Christian writers, such as John MacArthur, radio personality Hank Hanegraaff, who wrote books on heaven, and in it they read the popular material and said, wait a minute, a lot of these people are New Age, they have all kinds of non-Christian issues, and concluded that this is all just hallucinations. Now, I actually agree with many of their warnings. After all, Solomon warned us that the naive believes everything he hears. But these prominent authors failed to acknowledge and assess the vast NDE academic literature. They just looked at the popular stuff, saw the problems, and warned people, which we needed a warning against heaven tourism literature. But these prominent authors failed to acknowledge and assess the vast NDE academic literature. MacArthur concludes quite dogmatically that, quote, for anyone who truly believes the biblical record, it is impossible to resist the conclusion that these modern testimonies are simply untrue. They're either figments of the human imagination or else they're products of demonic deception, end quote. No wonder many Christians see no need to take a deep dive into NDE research. A third reason we've resisted going to this area, we seldom, if ever, find NDEs either mentioned or taken seriously in introductory apologetics books. Even the more recent ones that I read that were written in the 2000s, just some general apologetics introductory books, mention them only to say, well, this really isn't a thing, and just cut it down without actually going into the research. NDE, number four, NDE research has often been associated with New Age beliefs. And that's true. One researcher surmised that because Moody wrote his book in 1975 and a lot of academics were kind of into New Age themes at that time, there was kind of a height of this movement, that a lot of people studying it were coming from that worldview and trying to harmonize it. So you do have a good bit to this day, people who study NDEs and try to say that it promotes New Age teaching. But it's not everyone. And I think we don't need to assume that that is just for New Age folks. True, some claim that NDEs support a universal mind rather than a personal God, and reincarnation rather than a personal afterlife. Yet, such NDE accounts are so rare that Moody found none promoting reincarnation in his original 150 accounts. He kind of leans that way personally into New Age type things. But in his 150 that he interviewed, he didn't find anything about reincarnation. So this seems to me to be a very anomalous experience that people are pulling up when they're searching on the web for experiences. And God comes across as personal, knowing, and loving each of us fervently and intimately. A very personal God is who they be on the other side. Number 5, we don't get into this because we assume that evil people should not report peaceful encounters with a God who loves them. You got to remember, this is not after the fourth quarter. This is a halftime experience. So we're not expecting to happen in a near-death experience what would happen after a person's final death. I think that's a big part of Christians' problems. Yet, according to Jesus, God shows himself, quote, kind to ungrateful and evil men. Not just the people who are very nice. Why should it surprise us that wayward prodigals return from a heart attack reporting meeting a God who loves them? After all, God is love, according to 1 John, and if he is eager to encourage the lost to repent, according to Peter, we know that the kindness of God leads us to repentance, according to Apostle Paul. So why wouldn't God, if God loves the world, be showing even ungodly people his loving nature in order to lead them to repentance? On what biblical grounds could we assume that God should always scare the lost with hell in an NDE, especially since this is a halftime experience, not a view from beyond the fourth quarter? Also, consider that some studies find over 20% of NDEs having distressing, if not hellish, elements, which were ignored in the early part of near-death research, but are acknowledged more now. Number 6 reason we don't get into it is we assume that being a private visionary experience, NDEs have apologetic value at best only for those who experience them. As someone said, one testimony is an anecdote, 100 testimonies is data. Since NDEs are indeed experienced by large swaths of the sane population, we're not actually talking about are we not actually talking about massive eyewitness, empirically informed reports that can be assessed for their veracity, much as we assess testimonial evidence in our legal system? Besides, in my surveys of hundreds of students, regarding which of 17 arguments for the existence of God are the most compelling, near-death and deathbed experiences consistently come in near the top, if not on top. So I have a little book called Faith That's Not Blind, where I have 17 arguments for the existence of God. I have them read it in my Introduction to Religion class, and I'll say rate these on a scale of 0 to 10 as to how compelling they are. They're very compelled by miracles and near-death, deathbed experiences. Number 7, we feel that dramatic visions, although a large part of the biblical apologetic witness, must have been reserved for biblical times. While we see a broad range of extremely realistic visionary encounters with God and angels throughout Scriptures, with some containing elements of NDEs like Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, and deathbed visions like Stephen's vision of death, influential meta-theologies such as dispensationalism and cessationism convince some people that God no longer works this way. Yet, those who adopt cessationism, in part because nobody reports such experiences in the scientific age, should note surveys indicating that over 30% of Americans report seeing a deceased loved one. Get these statistics. 43% report inexplicable spiritual experiences. 54%, these are in America and very close to Great Britain. Statistics as well. 54% reporting being protected from harm by a guardian angel. Put it up there in front of you. Over 80% of the dying a group in a New York hospice were interviewed every day. These are dying people as to what they were experiencing. Over 80% of them reported deathbed visions, which my friend Stuart will be speaking on at 1 o'clock in this room. I encourage you to come to that. 80%, that means that deathbed visions are almost intrinsic, perhaps, to dying. And 82% of people, this is just the population in general, being very conscious of the presence of God at least once in their lives. So much for Bultmann's pronouncement that people cannot believe in such spiritual manifestations in a scientific age. Those who deny contemporary visions due to the Bible clearly teaching that no visions will occur after the closing of the New Testament canon need to show me that clear teaching, which I have yet to find. And no, I'm neither charismatic or Pentecostal or some elephant. So, why do I think it looks a lot like the Christian elephant? And my other book here that more recently was trying to harmonize the best of theology with the best of near-death experience research. Once you notice and observe the elephant in the room, contrary to atheism and secular strands of Buddhism, God exists. Contrary to pantheistic philosophies, he's a personal God who loves us with agape, selfless love. Contrary to Marxism, God is concerned more with how we love our neighbor than forcefully releasing the economic potential of the working class. Contrary to Jehovah's Witnesses, the deceased are encountered alive and fully conscious, not in soul sleep during the interim period. Contrary to mainstream Islam, many non-Muslims experience glorious rather than horrifying deaths, and it is Jesus who's reported in 17% to 20% of NDEs instead of Muhammad, who's rarely reported. Contrary to those who hold that people are all reincarnated soon after death, experiencers commonly see long-deceased loved ones who are still identifiable as themselves rather than reincarnated as animals or different people. Contrary to the most liberal of theologians, God is found to be still alive and well, communicating verbally and visually to people in the 20th and 21st centuries, and that a personal life exists after all. So these are some of my books talking about those themes. We also have J.P. Moreland and Habermas writing on that. John Burke has written, so we do have Christian intellectuals and popular writers who are actually writing about this. A little bit behind. Dr. Sabone has written 2 books on the subject. He's a Christian. Gary Habermas and J.P. Moreland addressed them in their book, Beyond Death. Habermas also harnessed NDEs to defend dualism and to defend the resurrection in his current books on the resurrection. He's got a whole appendix on near-death experience research in the end of his first volume on the resurrection that came out about a year ago. And Dr. Moreland devoted a chapter of his book, A Simple Guide to Experience Miracles, to NDEs. Apologist Lee Strobel includes a chapter on NDEs in his book on heaven. He's interviewed me for another book that he's doing in the spring on experiences. Pastor John Burke has written the New York Times bestseller, Imagine Heaven. You'll see it there, as well as Imagine the God of Heaven, often cited in NDE research. William Hasker, Charles Tolliver addressed NDEs in their article, The Afterlife and the Venerables Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So, also add my own books, summarize the evidence for God and the afterlife. So, how could you, as a philosopher or theologian, integrate this into your specialty? Perhaps the afterlife, of course, including hell and heaven and the interim period. That relates here. If you do some research, you can include that. Pioneer some research in that area, integration. The afterlife, the existence of God, character and nature of God, historicity of the New Testament, when defending the first century supernaturalistic worldview, thanatology, substance dualism versus monism, counseling the grieving and dying, the existence of angels and demons, the goodness of God as testified by NDEs. Nobody comes back from an NDE saying God is awful and mean or unjust. Wow, that feeds into the problem of evil in answering that. The justice of God, the importance and character of Jesus, visions and other phenomena, miracles, ethics, morals, values, philosophy of science, anthropology, and the origins of religious ideas. So I've argued that 47 near-death and deathbed elements overlap with and are consistent with biblical theology. And I'll close with a challenge from Dale C. Allison, Jr., Encountering Mystery. He's a Dearborn Professor of New Testament Studies at Princeton Theological Seminary. He addresses NDEs in his book, and he actually says that the reason he taught at Princeton all his life was because of a visionary experience he had when he was about 16 years old. So he comes out of it and says this, quote, "To have nothing worthwhile to say about events that typically matter deeply and are often associated with God is to be inept, and, at least in this particular, irrelevant. What good is an underinformed religious leader who is at a loss or dismissive in the face of mystical raptures, unexpected occurrences at deathbeds, visions of self-luminous figures, or encounters with dead loved ones?" End quote. Now, I will put it a lot less offensively to this dignified group, but I'll leave you with Dr. Allison's challenge ringing into your ears as we open it up for a few questions. And I will mention again, my friend Stuart here is presenting at 1 o'clock. If any of you want to talk, take a picture of that. That's my email address. I'm around here through leaving Saturday. So would love to talk to you personally about your experiences or questions. I'm around mostly for you guys. It's available, my books are available free as Kindles today and tomorrow, supposedly on Amazon. And I'll send them to you free as PDFs. I mentioned that this is up as a web project. If you want to keep up with Afterlife Apologetics and this web project we have going, please sign up here and we can send you an email when we put up a new article. And can I have a hand raise of how many people, either in your own life or in those around you, there's some kind of significant visionary experience? It could be deathbed. Okay, look around.